Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Phelan. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Gotham. Thanks for joining our series where we talk about things that people are asking you questions about. That's the secret for how I pick topics. If a lot of people are asking questions, I try to get together so I can just solve the problems all at once. This morning, I have Chris Maroun. Is that the right pronunciation? Yeah, Maroun.
That's right.
From CyberArk. He'll introduce himself, but he's one of the senior technologists over there and helping people kind of navigate this world of privileged access, secrets, and such. So, Chris, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us how long you've been at CyberArk, how you came into this part of the world? Give us your story.
Yeah, cool. So first of all, thanks for having me. Can't wait to get through this. I've been looking forward to it all week. So Chris Maroun, I've been at CyberArk now for going on my 11th year. And officially one of the senior directors of our field technology office. We handle field CTO responsibilities for CyberArk globally. There's a couple other guys on my team. How I got in this industry, very funny story. I was actually a golf pro. I grew up in Pinehurst, North Carolina, which is a big golf town. And I was slinging Excel spreadsheets for our golf shop one day. And my superintendent, the guy that actually cuts grass for the golf course, he said, "You're really good at computers. You should go and take some exams." And I was like, "All right, cool." So I went and took some exams, and I got my first job selling DSL internet for a company out of Charlottesville that's no longer with us. But that kind of got me started. And then fast forward 20 something years later, and I got started in privilege management about 17 years ago, working for another company that got transitioned all the way up to Dell and One Identity and those guys, and then made the move over to CyberArk, like I said, about 11 years ago. So it's been a crazy ride, but I've been doing privilege access management for so long now. It just kind of seems like it's the only thing I've been doing.
Nice. So do you still get out and play golf, or is that just not part of the program anymore? Oh yeah.
Well, it depends. It depends on if I'm traveling for work or where I'm at in the world. But yeah, I try to get out and swing the sticks every once in a while. So I try to keep the handicap as low as possible.
Yeah, now that me and all my friends are getting older, we're all like getting into that golf thing. But I mean, I certainly am not a handicap golfer, but I have fun, and I drink my way around the course. That works for me. Excellent. Excellent. All right. So maybe just give me a little definition here. Like we're talking, and I think there's just some terms that I hear about, the privilege management, secrets management. How would you define, like, what is privilege management? What does it do for people? And maybe even like, how is it different from secrets management? I guess it would be a question I have.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. I think that in the past recent years, I think that they're kind of getting intertwined. When we hear privilege access management, CyberArk has been in the space for a really long time. And I think one of the things that we've kind of progressed over the years, it's always changed. It was privileged identity management, then it was privileged access security, and then it was privileged access management. It just kind of changes over the years. And the way I define it is providing any person in any organization the ability to have elevated access to some resource within the entire environment. It's pretty simple. Secrets management, how I define that, is more on the app to app side of things. Whenever I hear secrets management, I immediately go app to app. We have a saying here at CyberArk at the field technology office. We say, well, applications are people too. They need elevated access just like any Windows administrator or Unix administrator or anything like that. But today, talking to a lot of customers, you'll find that they're using the phrase secrets management to kind of identify their privilege access management programs, because they look at every secret, whether it's a domain admin account or an application account, as a secret, and that's what they're kind of looking for. Now, not to say that there's any difference between the two, but like I said, some people just intertwine both.
All right. So how do you get this concept of an administrator needs a certain privilege, right? Needs an escalation to do something. What's that process of? What does it look like from a user perspective? Like, what does that process look like in terms of how they get privilege escalated? How it's just in time? How it's right? It has to be least privilege. Has to be just like there's a bunch of things that have to be right. And you could probably tell me what those things are and how do you make sure you do them?
Yep, totally. So I think the biggest thing is I've always said for CyberArk, through and through, we're always a security company number one, no matter what. Nobody comes to us and says, hey, I really want you to make our lives super easy. They come to us and they say, we need you to make our lives super secure. That's hands down, first and foremost for everything. Where a strong number two needs to be, and where we've always put a lot of effort into development, is that business efficiency side of the house. We always look at the fact that, and we're probably guilty of it when I was on the engineering team, is if you put a brick wall in front of us, we're going to try to figure a way around it. And what we don't want is administrators to have to figure out a way around it. We want them to be able to use the tools efficiently, so that way they can get the elevated access and not put a bunch of firewalls or hops between them and them doing their job. So I think the idea is that we set for us a least privilege policy for everybody and their normal everyday account. What you'll find is a lot of organizations that do not have a PAM program or a vault, that they will have one or two or as many as 6 to 7 accounts that they have. I've seen an underscore and a letter on somebody's initials or first initial last name more times than I can count. Or it's like, I have an A for my domain admin account. I have a U for Unix. I have a W for workstations. All of these types of accounts just make it really difficult, and it increases the threat landscape. The more accounts that live out there, the easier it is for an attacker to find one account that may have elevated privileges, or potentially to get them to one place where they find a password hash to something else, etc. So privilege access management is about being able to give those administrators the ability to elevate their own rights by potentially using an account that might be sitting in a password vault that is automatically rotated. So the accountability and the responsibility takes away from that administrator to rotate that password every single time. If you could imagine, somebody owning a domain admin account, well, imagine if the CISO has said to them, well, every time that you use that, you have to rotate the password and it has to be 26 characters long. That administrator is probably going to freak out and be like, I don't want to do that. So they use the password vault to be able to get elevated access, to be able to go out and do certain things. So we're giving the ability for administrators to get that elevated access utilizing an account that potentially is shared or is potentially in the vault and getting rotated. They don't have to worry about resetting the password. Now, we don't also want to make that where they have to go check out a password and type in all those 26 characters. So we make the business efficiency side the privileged session management, where they click a button, get connected, and they're off to that system, do whatever they need to do. As soon as they disconnect, guess what? That password rotates on the back end. They don't have to worry about it anymore. So we try to make it as efficient as possible for every administrator, no matter what type of system it is, to get that elevated access, do what they have to do. And then of course there's the auditing side on the back end too.
Yeah, but I think that is like a fundamental challenge, because you're not going to meet an administrator of any technology who wants privileged access. I mean, the easiest way for them to go through their day is just being simple. I mean, how do you create that sense of urgency that makes a CISO or somebody like, is that because that's part of the process. You really have to come in over the top as a CISO or as a security person and create some amount of disruption in the admins. And to your point, you want to minimize that. But I mean, I still like just creating that urgency. I mean, how do you have that conversation that, the criticality of this?
I will tell you, it's a lot easier than it was, 10, 15 years ago. When 10, 15 years ago, we were like begging people to do meetings. And it doesn't seem that long ago, but we were in that fear of uncertainty and providing those levels of urgency, for the CISOs, and say, look, this is a problem, whether you know it or not. Now, I think the roles have reversed a little bit. I think that people are coming to PAM providers, such as CyberArk, and saying, hey, we really need this because there's compelling events. I think a lot of the compelling events, whether it's a major audit or, hopefully not, but we've seen examples of breaches. I even think the FBI said that if you haven't been breached, it's just a matter of when you will be breached. And I think that Mandiant actually says that every breach involves some sort of credentials, some sort of way. And I think the idea behind it is that, we have to understand that these credentials are in fact what attackers are seeking out, no matter what. They can't just utilize, a script to get into an organization and then just start wreaking havoc. They have to have a credential, because then they have to kind of progress through the environment looking for whatever it is that they're looking for. So I think kind of to your question about, how do we create this urgency within every organization? I don't think that we have to do it. I think we're helping, kind of with our labs team and kind of showing off what breaches are going to look like in 3 to 5 years. It's starting to kind of creep up into the top 3 of what every CISO is trying to do in every organization that doesn't have a PAM program. So we want to help kind of create that sense of urgency, but I don't think it's as necessary as it used to be with us. I think people are now coming to us and thinking like, hey, we really need this because either A, we've been breached, or there was an audit. And then lastly, the newest one is cyber insurance. So cybersecurity insurance is really kind of coming down really hard on a lot of organizations these days, saying, hey, we are going to increase your premium by a significant amount unless you have 4 pillars in place. And one of those just happens to be PAM, making sure that these credentials of these highly privileged accounts are being managed in some sort of way. So I think all of those things kind of combined really takes away from our necessity to get in front of CISOs and saying, look, this is a problem, you have to do something about it, like we did 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think, to me, like even like the zero trust stuff, I see a lot of people, and I have this, and I agree with you, right? When a friend of mine becomes a new CISO and they're like, where do I start? I'm like, start with privileged access. Like it's such low hanging fruit. But I think part of even when we look at zero trust and some of the things, I see certain people, depending on their backgrounds, kind of migrate towards like microsegmentation and those things. And I'm like, I don't want to say that those are not useful at all, but certainly most lateral movement happens through privilege, right? It happens in AD, happens through privilege escalations, happens that stuff. And I think I think we're seeing that resonate, that people like see this as a core issue around the problem. Right? You'd agree that this is, it's easy, but it's certainly easier than microsegmentation.
Yeah. I don't want to sound biased when I say that privileged access should be the first thing on your list, but a lot of things stem from that. If we think about what an attacker needs to get through an environment, it's always a credential, right? We talk about credential boundaries all the time, where it's, certain accounts need access to certain parts of organization. And if you start creating those boundaries and managing the accounts and the credentials, whether it's an SSH key or password, so we're not saying password the whole time, but it eliminates the ability for organizations to, or an attacker in an organization to laterally move across an environment. So privileged access being first is something that it doesn't take an all-out light switch. You don't have to go in and immediately start managing every credential in the entire organization. There are certain ways that you can kind of get started with the low-hanging fruit, such as local administrator accounts on Windows, root on Unix, domain admin accounts, service accounts. Those are like the big 4 in my eyes, because that's what an attacker is seeking out, because more than likely, it's not actually going to be changed that much unless there's a PAM piece. And it gives them the ability to manually kind of get through an environment pretty simple, right? Because if I know I have a shared password for thousands of accounts on every single member server, it just makes it super easy for somebody to just kind of like move around. Now, right between my days in cybersecurity and as a golf pro, I actually worked for a couple banks for a few years, and I'll kind of take it back and say, well, I remember one of the branches, their branch sets. There's probably 50 to 100 branches. They all had the same local administrator account password. The name of the account wasn't actually administrator, which kind of, added a little bit of complexity to it, but they all had the same exact password. So if I'm an attacker and I was able to get my hands on that password hash, I could just move about. So I think privileged access is something that is definitely top 3. And I think that there's a standard, I always like to say there's no CISO handbook. I think it's just based on experience. And if somebody finds success in their PAM program at one place and they move on to another, they're going to find it successful in the next place, And again, I think Gartner, Forrester, Cooper Cole, they're all saying the same thing. PAM should be, top 5, top 3 of things.
Yeah. How do you make sure that people aren't sort of doing the natural thing, which is like making their life easier by kind of working around. I mean, once you have admin rights, you have admin rights. You can basically mess with stuff. You can change things. I mean, like once you're in, like how do you protect yourself? And how do I know as a security operator that my admins aren't doing, haven't like done these sort of workarounds or done these things or given themselves privilege or, how is that part of the CyberArk system? Is it a process people need to have? Like how do people make sure that they are in fact guarding the front door properly?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely part of the CyberArk system. CyberArk has grown up very rapidly over the past 3 to 5 years, and looking at a lot of different types of things. So, for example, right, a lot of people will hear CyberArk and they immediately go to password vault, but threat analytics on top of that, being able to detect when certain things happen, the endpoint privileges manager, being able to stop things from happening. I think that's key, right? Is being able to understand, even if it's not with a CyberArk product, if somebody's using CyberArk to get to a target system, being able to see what happens on that target system while that person is logged on. So let's say, for example, I log on to a Windows server with a domain admin account, and then I create myself a backdoor account. We need to be able to detect those certain types of actions, because then I don't need the password vault anymore to get in. I can just get in with that backdoor account that I created and added to the local administrator group. So whether you're capturing logs in through CyberArk or through anything else, those are the types of things that we should be detecting, because if you're not detecting it, then the password vault is only good for the accounts that you have in it. So CyberArk looking at, putting credential, boundaries in place, also being able to look at the endpoint side of the house, is being able to put, some sort of agent. I hate to say that word in this day and age, but put an agent on that system. So even if somebody logs on with an administrator account, we're going to be able to say in a least privileged manner what that account can actually do. So if you log on with another administrator account to that system, there's a policy there that says, yeah, well, you still can't access the firewall and some other things within that target system. You have to have a very special account to do that. So it's a matter of audit. It's a matter of analytics. It's about a matter of being able to see what's actually happening when people are logging into those target systems.
Yeah, it's almost like, and this is a broader conversation, but like, as solution providers, you go into accounts, we see many accounts have some form of PAM. But then you almost want like this like capability maturity model of like, okay, you have PAM, but like, are you really are you looking for, like I was doing something with somebody the other day and they basically just like, well, I'll just make you an admin for a minute, we'll fix this and we'll go on. And I'm like, where's the alarm on that? There should be alarm. And it also goes to how many of your systems are you really doing? Like, are you fully deployed? Do you have your Linux? Do you have your routers? Like, I mean, do you guys have a process for like helping customers, get to a full maturity model, or do you have a way of looking at that, or is it something you see?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that CyberArk aside, I think that every person that we employ has a lot of cybersecurity knowledge, right? We're always looking at trends. We're always looking at, what people should be doing outside of the CyberArk, systems. And, alarms are super heavy, whether you're getting that information from CyberArk or not. There's several tools out there in the industry that can give you the information when somebody's doing something out of band. And like I said, if somebody goes and figures out a way around, the security tools that are put in place, it really doesn't matter what you have, whether it's CyberArk or, a firewall or intrusion detection systems. It doesn't matter if they get around it and you're not figuring that out in some sort of audit or some sort of alerting methodology. Then you're just kind of left, just waiting for somebody to do some damage there. So I think getting alerts is super crucial. Getting notified, figuring out a way of being able to take action is something that's super crucial. One of the things that we are continuously talking about is how do we figure out proactive security? So for a long time, you're always like kind of reactive in a lot of different ways, right? Is being able to say, oh my gosh, this happened. Now we have to go and fix it. And we've been called a lot of times when an organization has been breached. Hey, we've been breached. We need you to come in and do an assessment. And it's more about just the privileged accounts that are in there and putting them into a vault. it's giving a customer the kind of sense of security that they need to kind of move on. And proactive security is how we're looking at things today. We're kind of coming up with some new solutions to help with that proactive security, but we need to be able to get that information somehow, be able to say, okay, well, I've got this account, it's running inside of a vulnerability scanner, and it's not being rotated. So whenever I always find that one funny. A vulnerability scanner goes out and scans for vulnerabilities, but it needs an account to be able to get to those systems that's pretty highly privileged. And if it's not being reset at the end of it, it's leaving behind a vulnerability. So it's kind of counterintuitive in a certain sense. But if we are able to find out that that account exists, bless you, then it becomes a point of we're being proactive in a sense that we could tell a customer, hey, you've got this account that's out there. You should probably reset that password before it becomes an issue going forward. So I think that's what a lot of CyberArk minds are thinking, and not just CyberArk. I think everybody in the industry is trying to figure out, how do we provide our customers the ability to be proactive in a sense before a breach happens, before some sort of compelling event happens. And that's kind of the new mindset.
Yeah, I find that's an area where a lot of people fall short, just service accounts in general. And I love the vulnerability management thing, because I was in a conversation. We were, when we send vulnerability scans or talk to customers of vulnerabilities, we obviously treat that as privileged information, because on some level that's a map to how to get in your organization. I would say that's pretty privileged information. But we had somebody, a customer talking about that, this is annoying, you have to encrypt these. I'm like, I don't think that's annoying. I think you should probably get your vulnerability stuff. So, but anyway, I digress. But I think service accounts are a big issue. And again, like talk about keys to the kingdom, like backup accounts. Like how can you have these backup accounts running? They've got everything, and if you lose your backups, which is a lot, in a ransomware event, that's a bad day. So I think that's one of the areas I think people make the integration with AD, they make the integration with some of these easier things, but the hard work of even finding all the service accounts and tagging them in and doing that is sometimes work people don't do. It's just something I found they fall short on.
We've been talking about backup accounts a lot recently, because some of the newer ransomware that's out there isn't just like going after one or two workstations and then trying to progress through the environment and start encrypting systems. They're getting in, and then they're looking for things like credentials on how they can move about and find a way to those backup systems so they can disable, delete, and then encrypt. And that's I mean, I hate to say it like this, but that's pretty cool. Like that these guys are getting so smart that they're not just encrypting systems and asking for thousands of dollars. They're getting in and they're finding a way to stop the ability for an organization to have their backup systems in place. So when they do get the encryption down to those systems, they don't have a fallback. They can't just turn those systems off and say, oh, it's fine, we have a backup, we'll just restore to our backup systems and everything will be fine. Then they go look in the backup system and they're like, oh man, well, that credential was breached, which allowed them access to the backup systems, which basically killed everything. Now we have to pay them. And what is it, 9 times out of 10, that even if they get the decryption keys, that they either don't work or their data doesn't get fully restored. And that's just horrible for every organization. So credential theft protection, I think, is really cool. There is being able to understand that it's not just credentials for Windows accounts and database accounts and things like that. It's credentials across the board, and what credentials you might be storing. We did a little bit of research back in the day, and I was troubled to find that people are using their Facebook account passwords, personal Facebook account passwords, for things that they utilize in their business world. And if I'm able to just breach my home computer and gain access to that credential, more than likely that attacker is going to be smart enough to try to figure out, okay, well, this person works over here. Let's see if we can get in that environment, try those same passwords and see which ones work. So protecting those backup systems, I think, is super crucial, and doing it in a way that doesn't interfere with the day-to-day operations of a backup. Making sure that backup system can access a credential is super crucial. Things like robotic process automation, that's another big one, right? We talk about service accounts. I remember there was a customer here in North Carolina that we went to them, let's say January 1st, and they said, yeah, we've got about 300 robots within our organization. And then we went back 6 weeks later in March, and they said, oh, well, guess what? We now have 900. So the multiplication of that is getting crucial, more and more crucial to protect, because these service accounts are no longer, I'm old school. Whenever I hear service account, I immediately start going and looking at like Messenger or NetLogon or print spooler services on a Windows box. But service accounts are pretty much everywhere, and they could be used in applications as well. So I definitely agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes very heavily to the cloud conversation. I mean, as you get to cloud, doing SecDevOps, doing all the IDs in the cloud, I think you and this is one of those conversations where you hope to get to the client as early as possible, because that stuff proliferates, and then you're trying to hunt it down and do it. If you can, catch that horse still inside the barn and just make that part of the process, and you're really well served to get privilege access. And I think that there's some sort of like break point on it. And I have my opinions, but I mean, I don't know why people don't immediately connect privilege access in cloud, but for some reason there's just that there's like some sort of gap of thinking there. And I'll save my opinion, but I mean, when you're talking to customers about cloud, I mean, how do you approach that?
Well, so that's a big topic, and that last statement I think hit the nail on the head. Is why are the cloud policies not the same as the on-premise or self-hosted policies? The only thing that I can maybe put my finger on there is just the sheer sense of rapidness that comes along with the cloud, right? A lot of customers are moving to the cloud, whether it's a lift and shift, a digital transformation, all the good buzzwords there. But the reality is that there are services within the cloud that allow companies to move faster and more efficient. Lambda is my new favorite thing, right? It's not new, but it's new in a sense that we've seen a lot of organizations that are taking advantage of serverless functions within all the big three cloud platforms. And the idea here is that I can create an application and not have the overhead of a server to go along with it. But what ends up happening, and I'll kind of give you a real life story. We were talking to a customer and he says, we're taking advantage of Lambda. We've got a ton of roles that are glued to these Lambda functions. And when the developer starts creating it, they ask for everything under the sun from a privilege perspective. This is not abnormal. This is the same thing that you'll see on a Windows box. I need full administrator rights, or I need a domain admin account. They're always going to ask for more privilege than they actually need. The difference is that if I say that for a self-hosted Windows environment, somebody's going to go, whoa, you don't need domain admin. Come on, that's crazy. But if I ask for administrator access policy in AWS, more than likely a developer is going to get it. And then they're going to build their Lambda function. And they're going to say, well, I'll go back in and clean up those permissions later. And I actually had a customer when we were talking about it, he started laughing on a call. I was like, I was kind of startled. And he said, look, I don't mean to laugh at you, but it literally just happened yesterday where a developer told him, oh, we'll go back in and clean up the permissions later. And then they don't do it. And now you've got a Lambda function that's out there doing 2 or 3 things, calling 3 or 4 commands, whatever. And they have administrator access in the policy that's associated with the role that's associated with the Lambda function. And so we're creating this new solution to kind of go in there and clean up those permission sets. Hey, you've got a Lambda function here, and it's got way too many permissions based on the commands that are actually running in the Lambda function itself. And when we showed that to that same customer, they were like almost falling out of their chair. This is exactly what we needed. Like, where has this been? And I think it's really important to be able to kind of talk about cloud in a sense of, making sure that the policies are consistent, no matter whether it's an on-prem self-hosted environment or that it's in the cloud. I really truly have to blame the rapid sense that the cloud provides as the reason why that's such a battlefield right now. Of it's just, hey, I want to get this service going, or I need to put my application over here, and they're just asking for more permissions than existing or than they need. And that's why I feel like the cloud is still a little questionable as to what the security is going to look like in a couple of years. But hopefully we can, meet as many people as possible and convince them that there's a better way, and truly get some better policies in place.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think you're right. I think people think of least privilege, at least conceive of it when they're talking about people and what rights a person should have, an identity, that's that thing. But as you get into these, whether it's service accounts, whatever, I think people just don't want to do the work of figuring out what the right. And by the way, the Amazon, in my mind, have done some research into it in some classes. I mean, the privilege model inside Amazon is super complicated. I mean, and so it is tempting to just go, just give me everything and work it out later, because I really can't figure out what the hell. And there's just layers and layers and layers of the types of privilege that you can give, and on some level, maybe that's genius because you can give it exactly. But fundamentally, as a person because we're all, most of these new teams are learning, it's just easier to just give full rights to everything and figure out and this whole figure it out later thing. I'm not even sure they want to figure it out later. It's just, and I think that's part of it, honestly, because you do these skunk works with cloud, whether it's an Azure team or an Amazon team, whatever, and the team just does their stuff. And part of it's trust too. Like some of the worst cloud outages I've seen have just been privileged access Azure losses, where someone just got into the privileged accounts and shut down your Azure. And you can't call Microsoft and say, go over to my server and reboot it. That's not how Azure works. So they're just the perception that's going to be okay. And the Azure team, who totally trusts Azure, they have Azure tattoos, they have Azure hats, they have Azure baseball, they're just surprised to find out that this wasn't something that Microsoft was handling for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with Amazon. I mean, there was the breach that happened 18 months ago, whatever it was, and it was just a misconfigured role, and that's all it was. And that allowed that person to be able to kind of get right into their organization and do what they need to do. And there was 2 misconfigured permissions in S3, and they were able to list every bucket and then synchronize every single bucket outside of their environment. And that was a massive hit. And it was just something that looked like normal activity, because it wasn't like, a bunch of breach alarms went off. It happened for months before it was ever detected. So I think that, the permission growth, I think, is the problem there. These organizations are, and it's happened to me before in my personal AWS account and Azure accounts as well, or subscriptions as well, where they'll turn on new services and all of a sudden I've got a vulnerability in my system. I'm like, well, I didn't change anything. Like something happened. At CyberArk, we're continuously monitoring the permission stack across every single one of the 3 major cloud platforms. This number blows my mind. About 15 months ago, the number of permissions was about 16 or 17,000. Now, this is across every service, across all 3 cloud platforms. It was about 16, 17,000. Just the last month, we got a new number because, again, we're kind of calculating all of these, and it just reached over 25,000. So in just a little over a year, we've almost doubled the amount of permissions that exists in all 3 of those cloud platforms. Imagine being a cloud security architect these days, and then all of a sudden, some new service that pops up in one of those cloud providers, and it's like, I've got just for one service, potentially 200 or 300 little dials and switches that I have to go in and navigate and determine what a person needs. There's no way. It's impossible for somebody to be that educated on every single permission for every single service. So you're right. The administrator access is just super easy to do. And then now we're seeing this massive growth in the cloud infrastructure entitlements management area, or CIEM. And it's like, it's a daunting, because I'm, as a cloud security architect, I can depend on those systems to tell me what permissions every person in my organization needs. Now, of course, it's going to need some tweaking and massaging throughout the years, but I think that the idea behind it is the same that we see with least privilege for organizations that have Windows and Unix and those types of things. The CIEM is something that's super important these days, and I really wish that a lot more organizations would kind of take on and adopt that. If they're using cloud, it's just a no-brainer to kind of get ahead of those permissions and make sure that they're not leaving out excessive permissions. Now, the last thing I'll say here is that there's a massive gray area for human users. It's a little bit more binary for the application side of the house, but again, back to the on-prem versus cloud, every user is going to request and say that they need more permissions than they actually do. Having a CIEM product there is really going to make sure that they are capturing what the user is doing on a daily basis and design policies that will allow that user to continue to do what they need to do. If they need elevated access, guess what? There's the PAM piece that can help them out there. Okay, you don't need it for your everyday account. If you need that elevated access, I'm going to give you just-in-time access with just enough permissions to get that extra elevated job done. And then you can go about your day with your normal day-to-day account. So again, CIEM, I think, is really important there to kind of help these organizations adopt and mature in that way of thinking of least privilege in the cloud.
Yeah, I think it's, again, I like what you're, getting that structure in place. But to me, it's so much about getting that structure in place and getting the developers making those calls, doing that structure, doing it now, using something like CyberArk or CIM in a DevOps way. Because the alternative is just them running around hard coding stuff, doing whatever they want. At least if there are changes, you have a methodology for knowing what the change, what the identities and the different privileges are, what's being called, all the structures. You have some library for all that. It's not just digging through code to figure out what the heck they were even intending. So I think getting that stuff early on. I mean, do you see customers like in a place that you think that they're getting to a state of the art CIAM? Is that a motion, or is it mostly it's like I look at places and they're a mess, but I mean, do you think there's a motion towards that, or things that you see that are working better?
So I'll preface this by giving you a story. 10 or 15 years ago, we started with privileged access management, and then as we started to progress with convincing organizations that they needed to manage their Windows domain administrator accounts, we got to applications, and they were like, whoa, you can't expect me to rotate that password. It's in an application, it's hard coded, there's no way. It's gonna break everything under the sun. It's gonna stop us from making money. Then once we convince them that, wait a minute, you can do that, you're just rewriting this code to say, instead of hard coding the password, just go get it from CyberArk first. And we proved the fact that it would work. That trickle was a little bit faster and faster and faster over the years that they adopted the whole secrets management kind of realm. Or as we referred to it back in the day, AIM, or application identity management, which allowed a lot of organizations to remove those hard-coded passwords. Now, when we fast forward to the cloud, it's almost like CIM seems to be a good idea, but organizations are like, man, I don't know, I'm going to break something. So here we are, like 10 years ago, 12 years, 15 years ago, whatever, and they're thinking themselves, well, I can't change this because I might break it. So what we have to do is we've got to convince them that there's a way of being able to do it without breaking things. And of course, our products are maturing. CIM in the industry is changing, and it's evolving, and it's providing threat analytics to cloud, and it's providing an easy migration path for organizations to adopt this new kind of fundamental security inside of the cloud, and it's making it easier for organizations to adopt. But I still think we're groundbreaking at this point, right? And this is just me, in my opinion, based on customer conversations that I have on a regular basis. Is they're like, I love the idea of having the visibility. Changing it, on the other hand, that's kind of like a step of the future. So I think that the more visibility that we can provide an organization, I think we're doing our part in providing the visibility and then shining the light on the problem. Now it's up to the organization on whether or not they want to take that next step in changing things. So we'll see.
Yeah, like I said, I hope that we just beat the drum about, like, the earlier you get in front of this, the less you're going to have to go back and fix later, because it's not tenable, and we know historically, like you're saying, it's just not tenable to just not do it. You're just creating a larger and larger mess, and the sooner you get it built into your actual DevOps practices, the better off you're going to be for it, because you're going to have a structure that you can kind of maintain and know what's going on for it. So,
and I don't think that technical debt is just with DevOps, though, right? I think that there's more people utilizing the cloud for other things than just DevSecOps, I think, or DevOps, and I think DevSecOps needs to catch up for that part. And of course, that's a big part of our business these days, and being able to adopt and change and looking forward to users staying in their own little world, and the native tools that they have with AWS Secrets Manager and Azure Key Vault, and to name just a couple. But I think it's now where a lot more people are utilizing the cloud for a lot of other things. Resource access for administrators that are doing the lift and shift. They're moving their resources to the cloud. They're taking advantage of EC2 and VMs and Azure. And so they're no longer worried about the on-prem stuff. Now we have to make sure that, a user can get to a cloud resource, whether it's a Windows, a Unix box, or whatever, with the right amount of permissions for just the right amount of time. And once they're done, we take that away. And I think that's really important that, I think the cloud started with the DevOps side of the house, and I think more and more human users are accessing it. So we got to be really careful about the permissions that they have and they own statically for the duration, right? We want to try to limit that to a least privilege model as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes we're stuck or challenged because we what we're finding is a shortage of what would just be good IT practices. Like we don't really have least privilege. We don't really, do annual rights reviews, like all the things that we would need to be, whatever, SOC 2 compliant, NIST programs, that kind of stuff. So, we have a technology, but without some of that underlying stuff. So I don't want to say we're showing the emperor has no clothes, but we're bumping into these facts of like, okay, these are things you should have been doing anyway, right? Like figuring out what your least privilege was, doing these, these reviews and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think that's part of where we need to bring the whole industry along, which is in those practices.
Yeah, I mean, attestation is huge, and CyberArk has a lot of those technology partners that really, shine when it comes to attestation and being able to, provide our information to those, different, technology partners, and even the information that comes along with what CyberArk has already is going to be really important for the CISOs or the managers, the directors, the auditors, the ability to have that visibility into what's going on in the cloud and making sure that it's not getting out of control. What I believe, and this is just based on my research and my conversation with customers, is the baseline I think is still a little wavy. I think that organizations are trying to figure out what it is that they need to kind of put a cap on as far as what privileges need to exist for every single user and how often it needs to get reviewed and those types of things, because the cloud moves super fast. You don't have to wait for some monolithic server to get stood up before you decide what permissions are assigned to it. So I think the ability for someone to go in with administrative access to a cloud provider and just start wreaking havoc is pretty much at the forefront. And I think what we need to do, and just in general, is as CyberArk, is make sure that we're providing visibility and providing tools that help them kind of gather the details that they need to make better decisions as to what they need to do for security in the cloud. And of course, create that sense of consistency with whatever it is that they have on-prem, because on-prem is not dead, right? There are some organizations that we have as partners, customers, that are complete cloud. Like they do not have a data center whatsoever. Their data center is an AWS account. And I think that the consistency still needs to be in place, as we're not focused solely on cloud. It's a big part of our business today, but making sure that we're creating a consistent procedure and policy for what is on-prem in the cloud, I think is super important.
Yeah, it's one policy, but again, I think that maturity is coming. I could tell customers, and I'm sure you like us, we work with a lot of different industries, and we just see these things trickle down from an audit, from a controls perspective, from the big financial guys through the pharmas, because it's, you mentioned cyber insurance before, that's pushing for a lot of this stuff. I see third-party risk. If you do any kind of B2B stuff, your customers who are other businesses are going to need you to do, to have these processes, have these structures, be, SOC 2, Type 2, have some compliance infrastructure. I think there's just a requirement that we all have to up our game in this space. And it's because of the ransomware, it's because of the attacks, because of all the rest of the stuff. And, the policies have to come, and the tools have to come, and then all that stuff, I think, is going to, raise the tide for everybody, raising tide floats all boats, right? I mean,
yeah. Including us.
Yeah.
I don't think we're left out of there. A lot of our new SaaS solutions have to go through all those procedures to get certified. FedRAMP is a really big one. In order for us to be able to even talk to anything in the government, any customer in the government, the first thing that they ask is are your solutions FedRAMP certified? And those are the things that we're doing on our end to make sure that our security products are in fact compliant with everything that an organization needs. And I don't think we're not any different than any other security solution out there, right? I think if a security solution needs to exist, there has to be a way of being able to secure that security tool. We've always said secure your security solutions, because if somebody is able to open that door, if it's wide open, then they can have access to anything that they want. So being able to show our customers, yes, we're doing our part in making sure that CyberArk solutions are in fact certified with everything that needs to be put in place for, especially for SaaS, I think is very, very important. And of course, we try to continue to do research as much as possible to make sure that we understand what's potentially going to be happening in 3 to 5 years, and then building solutions that will help, achieve that level of security. So it's consistently changing. Innovation is a big part of our daily lives. I'm fortunate enough in the role that I'm in to be able to work with that team, which is super cool. So I see things on the very cutting edge of that technology, and it's nice to be able to talk to our customers about where CyberArk is going. So if they make an investment in CyberArk, they know that we're going to continuously innovate and provide tools for everything that's coming forward. And I can tell you a very, very, very high percentage of it is dealing with the cloud and permissions and, making sure that security levels are really high.
Yeah, and I think that's been one of you guys, one of your market strengths is just as one of the early providers of this, you're only as good as your integrations, right? You're only as good as, like you're saying, how simple is it to make this change? Am I just pressing a button? Am I doing more? Because I think, we see other, whatever, not broadly, but other competitors, it's like, well, you could do this, but it's technical debt. Like, you've got to code it, you've got to write a script, you've got to do stuff, and I think you guys bring a lot of heritage, a lot of integrations, and also a lot of automation stuff, like the work with ServiceNow, or, I think, the less the customer has to do to get the value, the better off everyone's going to be. And the fact that you guys are going to own that going forward is fantastic. And I think customers don't always understand that when they have to customize something or write a script, well, now they own that integration. And anytime somebody moves a Jenga piece, you're going to be rewriting that integration. So what else is on the horizon for, I guess since you just brought it up, like what else is on the horizon for Crouch? Like where do you guys head from here?
So I can probably give you a little bit of a sneak peek into some of the things that we're spending a lot of time on. One of which is software supply chain. We've had a massive movement into kind of understanding the entire software supply chain from start to finish, right? It's not just about what applications have hard-coded secrets anymore, right? If we think about where we were 10 or 15 years ago and convincing customers to pull hard-coded credentials out of their applications. But now it's the software supply chain. We deal with what we refer to as islands of security all over the place. So Jenkins has a credential vault, and Ansible has a credential vault, and GitHub has, keys where you can store, credentials in. And I think what we want to make sure is that we're consistently looking at where some vulnerabilities might exist in that software supply chain. But the ROI isn't just from visibility for an organization. It's, okay, tell me what to do with it. How do I protect my software supply chain? So that's a really big one that we've been doing some research and doing some customer interviews at some of the big events that have been happening. It started with AWS reInvent back last year into RSA. And then next week we're at AWS Reinforce, which is in Boston. We've got a couple of speaking slots there that we're going to be talking about the software supply chain functionality that we're coming out with. So that's a really big one. We get a lot of questions from our customers of, hey, how do I secure my entire DevOps pipeline start to finish from the generation of an application to where that code is actually stored, and not just the life cycle of the application itself. It's also human user access as well, because if a human has access to Jenkins and the credential store there, what are they gaining access to in that area? So that's one big thing. Last week at our Impact event, we announced a couple integrations with some of the big cloud providers and their secret stores. So I was kind of hinting to this a little bit earlier, but one of the big things is that we've been seeing is that developers like to stay in their native environments. They like to be able to utilize the key stores that those native, cloud service providers are providing to them for their applications, because it's almost like it stays in-house. And then having an integration with releasing the credential rotation to CyberArk is something that's super important, because we have the connectors and we have the rotators already built. So all we have to do is just synchronize it out there to those key stores, and it makes the development a zero change. So you may have the notion to want to centralize all of that secrets management by allowing applications, no matter where they are, to call one central place. Yeah, CyberArk has that option as well. But if it's too much of a lift to change all of those lines of code, and you want to kind of stay in those native environments, then you need an answer. You can't just let go of security. You have to be able to kind of turn something on. So having an integration, and it was actually built with AWS partnership, and then it'll move into Microsoft and of course Google as well. It's being able to integrate the ability to kind of allow CyberArk to rotate those credentials and then shove them up into the cloud. So those developers just can keep coding and doing what they're doing. So that's a really big one. And then, of course, I think a lot of the movement that we're doing on the identity front is creating identity security awareness, being able to make sure that our customers know that it's not just about one single identity, which CyberArk has been focused on for a long time, which is that IT admin, the developer. It's now moving into every identity within every organization, and being able to provide that life cycle of, okay, this person is in this role, let's move into this role, and let's make sure that their permissions are getting shifted on that side. So every identity we see these days, especially with cloud movement and SaaS, requires some sort of elevated access at some point in their day, right? And I use our lovely payroll administrator on a daily basis when I'm talking to customers, because she has access to our payroll systems. You remember the movie Office Space, right? They wrote that little application that was supposed to extract fractions of pennies out of everybody's paycheck. Well, that in fact went haywire on them, but that's because they had to have had some sort of elevated access to that application. And our dear awesome payroll administrator, I use her on a daily basis, because I say, imagine her access level, or somebody that has access at a high level, elevated access to Salesforce. We need to protect those identities as well, because they're not part of the traditional IT admin kind of side. They're now in the business side of the house, and we need to protect those just the same way that we do any IT admin. So those are the big things that we're doing. We recently had an acquisition that was announced at Impact, and it kind of helped with some identity flows. And what we mean by that is making sure that it's easy for organizations to kind of set up a life cycle of a user and what access controls that needs to look like. So we're taking privileged access and we're multiplying it to really any organizational identity. And I think that's the biggest part of what we've been investing a lot in.
That's awesome. Thanks, Chris. We're just about up on the hour here. I know we had a couple people that watched live. We record these, so a lot of people catch them that way, but there were a couple people who did chime in live. If any of those people want to unmute themselves and ask a question, that's one of the reasons why you might have wanted to watch live, because you might have questions. No, I guess not. We just talked too much and for too long, Chris. We're not going to jump in. But is there anything is there anything you wanted to say that I didn't ask? Is there anything you feel like we left out, or any part of this conversation that?
No, not at all. I had a couple of things written down, and I was kind of mentally checking them off while we were going through, and I think we hit pretty much every nail on the head. Starting from traditional PAM into secrets management and the cloud, and there's so much more that we can get into, and CyberArk's always up for a conversation, no matter if that's an official conversation where we put on suits like we used to, or sitting around drinking a beer and talking about privileged access management across the world. But I really definitely appreciate the time, and definitely appreciate everybody joining for sure.
Yeah, no, Chris, thank you for coming out and helping straighten out all this stuff. It was very useful. So thanks everybody for joining. Everybody have a great day, and I will see you when I see you.